Gives me great pleasure to welcome you all here to the second Australian Medicinal Cannabis Symposium, which is a really important event for Australians, particularly for patients and carers. I'd especially like to welcome the Honourable Premier Mike Baird, who's become a champion for this cause of progressing medical cannabis in New South Wales. And I sincerely and personally wish to thank him for that support. Thank you, Mike. I would also like to welcome other politicians and VIPs here today. Your presence is a clear indication that there is great advancement in Australian attitudes to medical cannabis, and my hope is that by your attendance here today, your personal knowledge and support will further evolve, and ultimately the main beneficiaries will be sick and suffering Australians. There are not enough words to thank our keynote speakers who've given their time so generously to travel from around the world because they believe in medicinal cannabis. I'm excited to welcome them, and I look forward to hearing their presentations. I'd like to acknowledge our sponsors for the event, the New South Wales Government, Blackmores Bioceuticals, Epilepsy Action Australia, Medical Cannabis Clinic, and especially Michelle Crane and Hemp Health and Innovation. Michelle's efforts, as you can probably appreciate, have been mammoth in putting this event on, and we thank her for that. I'd also like to thank my husband Lou for putting up with me, the United in Compassion team, and especially my colleague Troy Langman, who is an absolutely tireless and dedicated worker. I'm so lucky to have him on our team, and we are all absolutely driven to make compassionate access to cannabis medicines a reality in Australia. So exactly what is compassionate access? What are we striving for? What has driven this movement in Australia and around the world? Well, for me it was quite simple. I was a mother watching my youngest son suffer beyond belief. When Dan was first diagnosed with cancer, I remember the oncologist telling us on the first visit that it's not like the old days. We've got great treatments for adverse side effects of chemotherapy. We wanted to believe him. We had no reason not to, but unfortunately he was wrong. Modern medicine doesn't have all the answers for every patient. Dan tried Maxilon, Stemetil, Ondansetron, Anzamet, Kyatril, Amend, Aloxi, Phenergan, and probably others that I can't even remember. Then one day, in sheer desperation, and with no expectation, he inhaled on a cannabis cigarette and his life changed. Our lives changed. He did not vomit again after chemotherapy. He put on weight, he began to enjoy food again, he slept better, he was less reliant on opioids, thus avoiding the many debilitating side effects. He was able to spend more time at home rather than in hospital, and he began to claw back some quality of life. Right or wrong, it was due to one thing alone, and that was cannabis. Then we met others like young Daisha Magic Stevens, who had her life with intractable paediatric epilepsy transformed from one of regular brain-damaging seizures on multiple harmful medications to one of regaining lost milestones and gaining the chance for life as a normal, happy, healthy child, which she is today. And there are many children just like her out there that are waiting for a better life, and we have some of them here today. I've now met many other Australians helped by cannabis. I met a lady from Tasmania who was planning to commit suicide. Her life with MS had become so difficult. She could barely navigate the front steps of her home. She was so immobile and racked with pain. Medical cannabis allowed her to put away her mobility aids and to regain her independence and her desire to live. I spoke to her just last week, and she was about to go on a long-distance holiday, fully confident and well enough to do so. I've met returned veterans who suffer from PTSD as a result of their war service. Medical cannabis gives them relief from night terrors and helps them to sleep, which is something which we all take for granted. I've met so many people having their quality of life improved with medical cannabis, but the harsh reality is they are still facing an additional burden because they remain criminals. If Dan were alive today, he would still be a criminal. Daisha and her mother are still criminals. Caitlin and Michael Lambert are still criminals. Thousands of sick Australians, just like Dan, are criminals, and I think that's untenable. We've made significant headway in terms of effecting change at a very high level, and I'm very grateful for that, but we have largely ignored the patients of today. We've begun clinical trials looking at various medical conditions. These trials will be invaluable into the future, probably years from now. We have universities developing programs to study cannabis in animals. That will benefit humanity one day, probably years from now. We have a scheme in New South Wales called the Terminal Illness Cannabis Scheme, but that is not a compassionate access scheme. It does not legislate for protection. It does not include children. It does not allow patients to have their medicine tested for safety. It does not allow other options to resolve dependence on the black market. It does not encourage open dialogue between patients and doctors. Sadly, it falls well short of exercising true compassion. I expect that you'll probably all gain significant knowledge today about the general science, the botany, the chemistry, the physiology, the history and the future of medical cannabis. But please, keep foremost in your minds the need for compassion around medical cannabis. In my mind, true compassion can only be achieved when patients are treated as individuals and their preferred and now recognised form of treatment is accepted more broadly through a formal and legal scheme. Cannabinoid research is clearly an area where science has not kept up due to a myriad of reasons, predominantly due to prohibition and the war on drugs. But the lack of randomised, double-blind controlled trials should not be used as a roadblock to compassion. The recreational use of cannabis should not be used as a roadblock for the sick who are suffering and prepared to break laws to reduce their pain and suffering. Clearly, cannabis is medicine with the capacity to improve quality of life for some of our sickest. Theirs are the voices that I wish to champion. Thank you. So I would ask you all to help us do just that. If you or a loved one are a medical cannabis user, I would like to appeal directly to you to participate in the online survey on our website. This survey will mark the beginning of a process to validate and learn from your experience so that we are better able to support you as we strive for change. And Dr. David Caldecott will speak more on that tomorrow. Medicinal cannabis is certainly a future treatment option for Australian patients, so I see no reason to delay enacting compassion. The political wheels are turning, and I'm grateful for that. But I implore the New South Wales Government and the Australian Government to play a more meaningful role by decriminalising the act of relieving suffering for people who will soon be able to access medical cannabis lawfully. Many of these patients are languishing under the burden, and like Dan, they do not have the luxury of time. So we have a huge program today, made more so by squeezing in 2 additional segments on the program to give firstly, an update on the situation in Victoria on today's program and a presentation on the health economics of medical cannabis tomorrow. So my most difficult role will be ensuring that we run to time, and we're already a bit late today. So we'll shorten breaks if we need to, and I'd ask that you move in and out quickly and quietly and be aware that speakers will not be able to wait for stragglers to start. So finally, I'd like to introduce our host for the day. Mr. Tim Harding is an entertainer and a musician. He's formerly an original member of the hugely successful children's program High Five. He's notably a patron of United in Compassion, but most importantly, he is a dad with his own personal desire for medical cannabis to be a reality in Australia. So I'll leave it to Tim to explain his individual circumstances that make his participation today so relevant. So, ladies and gentlemen, I prompt you all to turn off your mobile phones and I'll hand you over to Tim Harding. I hope that you get a lot from the program and have a great symposium, and thank you so much all for coming.
Well, very good morning to you all. I'm going to do my best over the course of the next 2 days to make this as entertaining and interesting as possible without doing any dancing. As Lucy said, my name is Tim Harding. My other name was the blonde guy from High Five. As she alluded to, I have a bit of a personal story with this. My daughter has intractable epilepsy, and unfortunately we are one of thousands of families that live through this every single day. And what is becoming more and more apparent is that medicinal cannabis is actually able to help her seizures and the seizures of many, many other children in a simply miraculous way. We've seen children go from having 300 seizures a day to having nothing. So it's incredibly important to us personally, but also for the good of New South Wales and the entirety of our country, that this stuff become legal and very soon.